Right. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Anubha Kakroo, and I'm a faculty member at the Anant Fellowship. On behalf of Anant National University and Anant Fellowship, we are delighted to launch Anant Fellowship Online, a virtual seminar series to facilitate conversations around the fellowship curriculum and experience. These seminars will provide you a glimpse into the exciting world of the program, the modules taught at the fellowship, and the community impact that we have through the live action projects. This is an opportunity to interact with inspirational speakers, practitioners, faculty members, and of course, our Anant Fellows. If you wish to continue experiencing these conversations at the fellowships, you are welcome to join these hour-long virtual seminars. Tune in every Friday, generally at 20:30 hours IST, but today at 1800 hours IST because our speaker for the day is in the Eastern Zone. But tune in every Friday for lessons in biomimicry, economics, literature, philosophy, music, poetry, art, sociology, and much more. Tonight, or this evening rather, I'm delighted to introduce you to Mr. Doug Woodring. He's the founder and director of the Ocean Recovery Alliance. Ocean Recovery Alliance is a registered nonprofit in California and is a registered charitable organization in Hong Kong. Ocean Recovery Alliance brings together new ways of thinking, technologies, creativity, and collaborations in order to introduce innovative projects and initiatives that help to improve our ocean environment. It has two projects currently with the Clinton Global Initiative focused on the reduction of plastic pollution, and is of course one of the only NGOs in the world to be working simultaneously both with the United Nations Environment Program as well as World Bank's Global Partnership for Oceans. It is also the founder of the Plasticity Forum, originally launched at the Rio Plus 20 Earth Summit. Hi, Doug. It's good to see you.
Hi, Anubha.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm sure our attendees are waiting to hear from you. So I'll give you a quick schedule for an hour. Doug, you'll be speaking for about 25 to 30 minutes, after which our Anant Fellows and attendees can ask questions. For the attendees, I can say you can give your name or raise your questions using the Q&A function of Zoom, or you can send your questions anonymously. Just for your information, this seminar is going to be recorded and posted on our website, YouTube channel, social media pages, and we'll be sharing the link with you shortly. So I hope everybody is ready for an exciting evening. And now, without further delay, I'll turn over the screen to Doug for his talk. So Doug, all yours now.
Thank you, Anubha, and thank you for the fellows for having me tonight, and from wherever you are in the world. Let me just get my screens up here. So I'm going to talk to you about the ocean, but the ocean is the conduit for all of the work that we're doing. But as you can see from the title, it's how you can play a role upstream, because one of the main things that we focus on is plastic, and plastic primarily comes from upriver and up country. So a lot of people who don't even touch the ocean could still make a huge impact with their waters and what runs downstream. Everything that runs downstream goes to the ocean. So I'm going to talk about some of the bigger global business policies that we are working on, and also some of the creative angles in how we engage and try to engage different stakeholders, young or old, government, private sector, or the general public. And hopefully some of this will inspire you. I'm going through a lot of different pieces here. Happy to chat again in the Q&A, but I just want to give you a flavor for what we're touching on. I got my history, or my start, really when I got out of university. I went to UC Berkeley, went straight to Japan when Japan was booming, and I worked with one of the largest fishing companies in the world, trading seafood. And maybe now I'm repaying for that, but it really struck me in my head and my heart at that time that the amount of seafood that was being taken out of the ocean at that time, and still today even worse, was so great without that many people really realizing it when they go to the restaurant or to the shops where their seafood comes from. I said to myself, wow, someday I want to try to protect the ocean and do something for that. I also am a very avid and active sports person. I've been swimming all my life competitively. I organize some of the largest open water swims in Asia in the ocean, and I'm a competitive outrigger canoe paddler. So I'm in the water a lot, and I see things in the water, trash, unfortunately, a lot more than a normal person might. And that has given me the inspiration to sort of to make sure that we keep this clean. I try to use sports, and we try to bring connectivity and a vector with the sports and athletes, whether they're water athletes or land. Everyone wants to train, recreate, and compete in clean air, water, land, sea, whatever that might be. On the side of plastic, we believe it's actually one of the most difficult challenges to overcome today, even in some ways harder than climate change, simply because there's over 40,000 types of plastic that actually exist. They all exist within 7 families, but when you mix all the different chemicals and the colors and the different melting points, you have a myriad of all these materials that have to get resorted again in order to be effectively recycled or to bring that value. Now, I put this picture up, and you might have seen it before, but it has a couple stories in it. This child is picking up straws because there's value put on that material in the city where he is, which is Jakarta. As soon as we put value on it for whatever reason, there will be reasons not to throw it away. Everything else that he's around actually can have value if you gasify it, if you turn it to energy. But most cities and counties in the world do not have the technology today to do that. So it gets dumped and put away in places we don't want it to go. Unfortunately, a lot of people have grown up their whole lives with this seen as their normal. And this was in Hong Kong 2 years ago. It was like a solidified oil spill came from the Pearl River Delta. People went to the beach. They still went sunbathing. They still went clamming. They still had fun. They didn't call anyone. They didn't pick up any litter, and they just assumed this is the way it is. Someone else will clean it. So when we start talking about education and the challenges with education, we have to really think about how do we get to the teachers, not just the kids, but how do we inspire the teachers who have grown up with this for 20 or 30 years, and they don't really feel that there is a difference or can be a difference. And that is a big challenge to get into the schools and teaching. How much do we make a year? If you look at the population of the world with municipal solid waste, which is household waste and company waste, but not construction waste, not the heavy materials, we would cover Japan 10 meters deep every year in our waste globally. If you believe, that's the size of the Olympic diving board. If you believe in the population growth estimates and more consumption, more buying power, more packaging, in 20 to 30 years, we could cover Japan, Spain, and New Zealand in 10 meters of waste. Now, obviously, almost no country is prepared for that today, and probably won't be at that time. But of course, there will be a lot of technologies that come along. There will be alternatives. There will be avoidance. And so maybe we won't get to this number. But for those of you who are young and looking for entrepreneurial jobs and opportunities, this is going to be a huge sector because right now it's still severely under-entrepreneured. So if you look at this graph, it's very much like a carbon graph, but it's the growth of plastic consumption and use since the 60s. And it goes almost up at a 45-degree angle. It continues at that pace. Now oil is actually cheaper, which makes it harder for recycled material to get into the market because it's too easy to buy cheap virgin material. But the tragedy is the bottom line. That's the recovery line. That is the amount of investment and infrastructure that has taken place in that time period on waste management and recycling. Waste is not a very sexy topic. It does not attract the likes of Elon Musk and all of these great entrepreneurs, but it needs to. just like with climate change. If you take the pie of this chart, you try to whittle it down with climate change, with solar, wind, hydrogen, hydro, nuclear, whatever your sources are, the same thing has to happen with plastic and all of the different pieces of the puzzle that can help solve it. When you look at couple charts here, unsound disposal, that means illegal dumping, burning, dumping in the rivers or creeks. So the richer you are as a country, the more likely you are to have trucks, waste management system, recycling system. But on the left side of the graph, which is most of the countries, they don't have that infrastructure and resources, and therefore things get loose and lost into the environment. It's not necessarily because the people don't want to dump illegally, but they don't have the capacity and the facilities to do it. GNP per capita and recycling, same kind of story. The richer you are as a country, the more likely you might have good laws, good recycling systems, good pickup and recovery. But most of the world does not have that. And in fact, when you look at recycling globally for plastic, it's about 10%. So even though your plastic bottle and your plastic toys on the bottom or the package, they say, I'm recyclable, recycle me. Unfortunately, most of the infrastructure in all the countries where those products go to doesn't exist for those things to actually get recycled at the end of the day. One of the things that rarely gets discussed when we talk about the ocean and ocean protection of plastic is a lot of things that happen on land, and one of them is burning. So I'm going to talk a little bit here with a video from example of what happens when we burn.
Unfortunately, this is the way approximately 40% of the world's waste is managed, uncontrolled burning. Most villages and small communities around the world don't have waste management systems. They don't have a truck that comes by and gathers their trash, so they either put it in the water or they burn it because they just don't want it in their front yard. And this is a huge issue, causes three main problems. Immediate respiratory issues, which you can smell and give headache and all kinds of potential sickness. The toxins from the plastic go into the air and into the rain and come back in agriculture, on the soil, in the water for the fish. So that's a health issue for us, and it creates carbon black. The soot, which creates global warming as it heats up with the atmosphere. So this is something we all have to try to fix.
So up to 40% of the world's waste is actually burned in that manner. And once it's burned, we forget about it, we don't see it. And so that's why it's not talked about so much. It often happens at night, it's illegal, but you can usually smell it once you smell the plastic. A lot of you might have seen this picture before. It's albatross. Unfortunately, they forage for food in the ocean, and they find this food, which they think is food, and they regurgitate it to the baby chicks, and the baby chicks fill their stomachs with plastic, and obviously there's no nutrition, and they die. And there's also a design story to this, because you can notice all the bright colors. So all animals like bright colors. If they see it in nature, they think it's an egg or shrimp or squid. In the ocean context, if it smells like algae, it smells like food, they will mistake it for food. But the point is, we often hear about the ocean animals, dolphins, whales, turtles, but we have to remember the land animals. They do the same thing. Every animal in the world will eat plastic if it fits in their mouth and it smells or looks a little bit like food. Giraffes, cows, birds, chickens, dogs. So it's not just the ocean issue, even though that's what has gravitated the world. And when you have animals in our environment who are eating this, obviously that's an issue, and getting it back into our food chain. I'm going to show you a very interesting video here from Dubai.
So I'm here with Marcus Erickson from Five Gyres. We're at the Monterey Bay Aquarium after a great event on plastic pollution for aquariums, and we got an amazing piece of treasure here from Marcus. Marcus, what is this?
So this is a camel gastrolith. I was in the deserts in Dubai. I met a veterinarian, said, let's walk out of the water, go in the desert. Went to the top of this ridge, looked over this ridge, and we saw piles of white bones. Each was a bleached camel skeleton. In the middle of each one was trash. So inside of a camel's stomach, this gastrolith was found. I estimate, 150, 200 plastic bags and rope. It's all calcified together, you can see here. That was in the camel's gut. And the veterinarian said it kills camels in 3 ways. It toxifies them because the folds of the bags hold bacteria. It creates blockages, and also the mass of it dehydrates them. They feel they're full when they're not. They lose weight, they dehydrate, and they die.
So I don't know if any of you have heard of the broken windows theory, but this came out of New York in the 70s when there was a lot of crime. And basically they did a social experiment, said if we clean all of this up, then it will be much less likely that people will do damage again, and they will actually self-police, and they will be proud of where they live. So I'm going to show you how that relates to the rivers and creeks of our world.
If you've heard of the broken windows theory, that came out of New York when there was a lot of crime and broken windows and graffiti on the trains. They figured out that if you clean trains and fix the windows and make the community look good, people have pride and they're then protecting their own space and happy to be there, and they want the water to be effectively not dirty and clean. And so what we've got here is a boom that we created. Actually, it's a net system that was put up by the fishermen. It's one of the global alert sites along the Siem Reap River in Cambodia, which runs into the Tonle Sap Lake. And you can clearly see that if you do a little bit of management, you can trap all of that material so it doesn't go downstream, and then we clean it up. And tomorrow there'll be 1,500 people on different stages of this river doing a big cleanup with Global Alert and the Waterfalling Festival.
So if you look at the left side of the photos here, this is the broken window, and this is a creek in Manila. But on the right side, they fixed the window. And now you can have a discussion with the community because they're proud to live there. They're happy to have the bike path and the flowers. The water is not perfectly clean, but you're not likely to be the person who throws that garbage bag into the water as the first person to do that once they've cleaned. What this then gives you the ability to do is build trust with the community, whether you are an NGO or the government or a university. Whoever did this cleaning job can now go to the community and say, great, now we've done step 1, let's do step number 2 or 3, which might be fix the sewage and do some other improvements in the area. But unless you fix that broken window, it's very difficult to go to the next step and have that kind of discussion. So something that's happened just a couple of years ago, which we never would have expected in Asia, was that the governments were so astounded by the amount of trash that they actually closed some of the 2 of the top tourist spots in Thailand and Philippines because of trash. So governments are now very aware of this. I've been working on this for over 12 years, and it's really the last 18 months where the momentum has changed. The snowball, someone pushed the snowball down the hill, and it's starting to roll on its own and gain that momentum. The governments are talking about it. They're taking action, sometimes very quickly. That's tough for some companies, but also companies are now looking for recycled content, and they're making pledges for 5 years, 10 years from now that says we want more recycled content in our products, but they can't find it because the recycling systems that I mentioned before with the infrastructure just are not there to supply these big companies with the quality feedstock that they have that's price competitive. Great opportunity though, and this is what's coming. So when you look at the difference between climate change and plastic and pollution, plastic pollution impacts over 2 billion people every day with bad water, that's bad for your health, your washing, drinking, bad tourism, bad agriculture, bad fishing. All of these things add up together, and that's a daily basis. It's not a climate change issue, which might be geographically centered based on a storm or a drought or a fire. And we have to remember that all trash has left someone's hand before it became litter, before it became garbage. So we're one hand away from solving this. Now, of course, the infrastructure is not there, and of course, all of these other challenges are there. But if we think of it that way, sort of an interesting angle. On the retail and the consumer goods side, it's a free reign. It's like the Wild West. Companies are allowed to use any material they want. There's no standardization of materials. That makes it very hard for recycling. There's very few rules and incentives for companies to either use less, to collect more, or to do lots of reduction or new materials. So all of these products are packaged in PET or a similar very clear plastic, not contaminated. It would be very easy to recycle. If you bring this back into the retail center, that brings consumers back into the door of the shop, and it makes a great story. And then the recyclers will be interested in catching uncontaminated, pure, high volume material. And that's what we have to think about. So as a consumer, when you go to the store, you know, do you need to buy plastic bottles of water? Maybe you do. Maybe they don't need to be wrapped in another thing of plastic so you can carry 4. Certainly, you probably don't need bananas that are wrapped in plastic. One of the other things on trash side, especially with the rigid materials, bottles and soaps bottles, is the air. Almost no one's talking about the air issue. And if we get the air out of these plastic bottles, you can make almost 8 to 9 times more space in your truck. So if you were a truck driver collecting 1 ton of plastic, plastic bottles, you would be able to get roughly 45,000 bottles. In a normal market, before the oil prices crashed and before the recycling market crashed, you might be able to get $500 a ton for good quality PET, which is plastic bottles. If you compress that or shred it, and you're the truck driver, you could now get 9 times as many bottles in that same truck. That's 350,000 bottles worth $5,000 almost. And you have 8 less trucks on the road. That's 8 less trucks making traffic, diesel, ruining the road with potholes and all of that. So we really need to think about this as a creative way within each village and community, local community, because this has to be done at the area where the material is used and collected, not in some big processor in the city. The real challenges of recycling is that you cannot do it without volume and quality. And if you're just throwing your garbage together with all the food waste, almost impossible to get good value out of that. Think of an omelet and someone making you an omelet with eggs, cheese, mushrooms, and sausage. And someone says, great, thanks for the omelet. Now reconstitute it back to the original form. And that's what recycling is like. Pulling that omelet back to the original state, very difficult. Collection is not recycling. So if you're putting things in a recycling bin, that's only collecting. That's not actually recycling. It might be part of the system, but you're not actually doing that. In fact, a real recycler, if you think of it in a good way, is the buyers who demand recycled content. So all governments should be putting recycled content minimums in their tenders, and companies should be using as much recycled content in their products, because that creates a pull factor to get this stuff through the system. One-way trade, we have the Basel Convention is changing in a few months, and that will bring plastic into the hazardous trade area. That could be a backfiring situation, because it essentially allows products to come into a country, but if you can't trade like a commodity outside of your country, if you don't have the resources internally with the manufacturing and the industry to absorb the material that's in your country, you need to be able to sell it to someone else. And if we're not allowed to do that, that will be a big problem. Also, water processing is a big issue for recycling, which most people don't think about. They think, oh, the plastic is so dirty, it's nasty. A lot of that can be fixed with proper water management and circular system of the water system in that city where the recycling plant is. And that is what will make the government happy and much more easy to run these recycling facilities. Water quality. Circular economy. Estimates are over $4 trillion worth. If you take your products and find ways to repurpose them and reuse them, like the kid who was getting the straws in Jakarta. If you look at the value of just waste material going packaging, only packaging, going into the US landfills, it's $11 billion worth, and about $8 billion of that is in plastic packaging only, not even the products. So there's big opportunities here if we can change this dialogue. A lot of people say single use. Oh, we have to ban single use. Well, what does single use actually mean? Can it be designed a way to not have the product? Is it single use only for convenience? And can we have it if you don't actually need it? Sorry, my slide didn't change there. If it's not needed for functionality, then we don't actually need design to be the change factor. What that means is it's social and branding and marketing. So if it's not needed for functionality and it's still single use, then we really have to think of the way that that's being used, because most likely it's only being put into the market for branding and marketing purposes. Two of the big global projects that we announced many years ago, the Clinton Initiative, were probably 8 years ahead of their time, because companies and governments weren't quite focused on plastic like they are today. But now this is very valuable because people are looking at the circular economy. They want to know how to circulate. We launched the Plastic Disclosure Project, which is very much like carbon reporting and water reporting, but for trash with a focus on plastic. And if you don't measure what you have, very hard to manage what you're working with. And so there's no right or wrong number here, but it could be used for companies, institutions like universities, airports, stadiums, hospitals, and governments. We're working now with the UN in Thailand and Malaysia with companies and municipalities to undertake this program. So there's a lot of ways you can get the low-hanging fruit out of this. Of course, people and companies need to use plastic for many things, but there's still a lot of waste. And if you undertake this program, we believe that the decrease in the low-hanging fruit or the improvement, it can be 10 to 30% very quickly, because you start reflecting on how much recycled content you are or not using, improving recycling programs. That doesn't mean putting a few bins in your school. It means getting engaged as a company with your employees, with the clients that you work with and the communities you're serving. Less plastic in the supply chain, new designs, new materials, biomaterials. And this is important also for ESG reporting, environment and social governance. That's more and more important in the asset management industry and the insurance industry. So if big companies invest in you as a company, just like with the carbon, where there's carbon liabilities on taxes, plastic has its own different kind of liabilities and opportunities. Unlike carbon, plastic, a lot of products have a brand name on it. So if your brand is continuously visible by people in the waste side and the litter side, with social media, it's possible that your brand can go up or down very quickly in terms of people's feelings. And that is very important for the value of that company on the stock market. On the other side, you have opportunities with new materials, new products, new way to engage people, bring back programs, getting people in the door to do more with your sales and bringing products back for recycling. The other program we launched was the Global Alert Platform. This is a bit like Waze for traffic. It allows you to report trash hotspots anywhere in the world's waters. It's now in Spanish and English. It was partly funded by the World Bank. And thanks to Morgan Stanley, a few years ago, we launched this in Times Square, New York. They gave us 1 month of airtime to advertise on their city block wide screen of trash and waste for the ocean. So this was a pretty neat multimedia opportunity. But if you think of rivers and creeks like blood vessels, and you think of the heart as the ocean, think of plastic as cholesterol. So it's easier to catch that cholesterol when it's going through the blood vessel than it is once it gets to the heart. Rivers and creeks run one direction only. They have a riverbank on either side. It's quite easy, like I showed in that video with Cambodia, that you could do different styles of booms and nets and catchment devices. And that's what we really want this to focus on, is upstream community engagement. If you see stuff, maybe you can't clean it, maybe you don't know who to call, but at least if you geotag it and get some photos there, some stakeholders in that watershed hopefully will be able to use it. And rivers and creeks are really a main way of throughput of the loss of plastic that's getting into our waters downstream in the ocean. And when you see sometimes a photo of plastic in a river, you say, that's not nice, but it's a still image. When you look at something like this and you see continuous flow, and many of our creeks and rivers around the world are like this 24/7, it's a real challenge, but it's not something that we can't fix, and it just takes some focus. So our app is on both app stores, basically lets you fly in to any watershed on the planet and manage that creek or river with stakeholders, NGOs, university, high school, Rotary Club, government. So we have the platform, we just need people who are engaged. Communities can stitch everything together with those stakeholders, and you don't need a lot of people to do the reporting, actually. Even a couple people on the creek or river can do that every week or every 2 weeks. So what do you do with the mixed dirty plastic? This is what we call tragic plastic or mixed dirty plastic. This is the 90% of all plastic that's never getting recycled, and it's getting burned. And we all know what this looks like. There's some new opportunities coming for this. That includes asphalt, concrete, chemical recycling, which is not at scale yet or small enough. They're mostly big refineries, and plastic to fuel, which is liquefaction of this into a diesel or a different fuel liquid. So this is something where you take mixed dirty plastic and you put it through a dry washing system, and you make lightweight aggregate. And that lightweight aggregate is treated in a certain way. Usually plastic will not bind very well with concrete. This is made by the Center for Regenerative Design and Collaboration out of Costa Rica, who we're working with. And all of this material that we got in a few minutes in a beach cleanup in Costa Rica doesn't need to be washed, doesn't need to be sorted, can be thrown straight into the shredding machine. Of course, you pick out the more valuable parts that can be recycled at a higher value, but all the other stuff can go into a brick. And you only put 10% in. It's not a big plastic brick. 10% actually makes the brick stronger, lighter, little bit of insulation, and it absorbs all of that waste into an inert way that creates something that the world needs, which is concrete. In fact, if you take the world's yearly plastic production, over 340 million tons, and you put all of it into the concrete demand market in 1 year, you would only account for 2.5% of the world's concrete use. So all of the plastic could be absorbed. It will only take 2.5%. Of course, a lot of plastic has not become waste because it's long-term, used for airplanes, cars, medical equipment. But this little pile of aggregate here is about the same as using 10 bottles in that brick. You wouldn't use the bottles in this case because they're more valuable as recycled PET. They wouldn't go in there. We've done work with Habitat for Humanity. This was in Costa Rica. 124 houses, 1,500 blocks per house, and created, used 68,000 kilos of trash in those bricks. And this is a great story for places that don't have, and you don't need high-end equipment. So when you bring these kind of solutions to our communities, one of the challenges with plastic is we need many, 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 many machines all across communities around the world, not one big machine that goes in the big city. Trash is localized, and you need localized solutions that can get the villages and the communities up to speed with some value added processing, even if it's just cleaning and grinding to get it to the next city. That's already a big improvement. So this is a school in Cambodia where we're working. We got the first shredder. We're gonna, when we do our cleanups, we have 2 events there a year. One is this weekend, but it's called the Water Rising Festival and the Water Falling Festival, which we started 2 years ago. Engaging local communities, the monks, the fishermen, and we want to be able to, now that we've got the momentum behind all these village communities on the lake, we want to bring the solutions which can at least absorb some of this. So here the monks are pulling the plastic out of the trees because this is the only lake in the world that rises and falls 6 meters every 6 months. That's almost 20 feet. And when it goes out, it pulls all the plastic out of the village and into the trees and into the bushes, almost like Christmas ornaments. So when the tourists go by, all they see is the plastic in the trees. When the water rises, which is happening right now, it brings the plastic from the lake back into the villages, almost like a big monster coming back in. And that's the premise for what we're doing here with this event. And it's just been amazing. We've engaged over 8,500 people, and we've worked on the rivers. We use Global Alert to find where the hot spots are. We put up the booms and the nets, and we have regular management to remove that material from those locations. I'm just going to show you something here for this weekend. So that's our cleanup that's happening this weekend, socially distanced, as we're still doing it in the appropriate way. Something else to bring creativity and arts. We do a lot with visuals because it catches people's attention in different ways. So we wrote a play called Uncle Roo, the Recycling Rooster, and it uses eco-repetition, which we named, which is the power of nature. Nature makes noises every day, and almost every village in the world has a rooster. So when the rooster crows, people wake up and they hear it. So in the play, the rooster is the leader of the village, and the fish and the animals and the people get sick from too much plastic in the village, and the rooster comes out crowing all the way, cuckoo, cuckoo, and he says, recycle, you've got to recycle and manage your waste, wet and dry. Get the organics out, sort it by dry, and then people can get the value out of that material. And the crowing of the rooster is the eco-repetition. So when the kids wake up in the morning and hear the rooster, they can say to their parents, Mom, Dad, I have to go sort my waste and recycling. And that's the spirit of this. It could be a play, a puppet show. We have it in 7 languages. We'd love to have some of you take it to your youth or adults and have some groups perform that. We also run Plasticity, which is an event I launched in the Rio Earth Summit in 2012. We've had it in 13 cities around the world. It's all about plastic in its second life. How do you reincarnate plastic? Of course, we want to avoid plastic. Of course, we want to not use it if we don't need to, or find alternatives. But it is necessary for so much of our life today, and it will be for the next decades. So we have to find a way to not have that become garbage. And that's where you bring in the concrete, the fuel, recycling, better social systems to collect this material. Our last event was with the UN in Bangkok in November. We hope to do it again this November in Vietnam. It will depend if it's socially distanced or live or a blend of both, and we hope some of you can be part of that. Something else we just finished is a report on scoring, which was funded by the United Nations Environment, 580 global commitments on plastic pollution made by companies, governments, and the public sector. And the premise was that these commitments are not necessarily being followed through. They're not so transparent. They don't have money, and they're not working as well as everyone hoped. We now have a great new scorecard, one of the only in the world to score these kind of commitments, and also a toolkit. So anyone who has made old ones can improve them, and anyone making new commitments for plastic in the future can use the version 2.0 and look at these scorecard and toolkit so they can make better, stronger, more impactful, more replicable commitments. So we'd be happy to talk to some of you. Once you do that commitment, then you can use the Plastic Disclosure Project to measure and manage how you're doing on a yearly basis. I'm almost done here, but going back to art, this is the skyscraper. It's 11 meters tall. We brought him to Singapore in November. He was built for Europe, and we brought him to Asia. We were going to do a big Asian tour, the whale tour. Have we breached the limit? And unfortunately, because of the virus, we aren't able to do that now, but he would have been right now in front of the Natural History Museum in Shanghai. So I'm going to close here with a little trailer of our skyscraper that was made by Studio Ka and out of New York. Great. So thank you very much, everyone. And let's go into Q&A so we can start talking about some of this. I hope you like that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doc. That was really, really, as somebody has already put it in the chat box, much more lively than one expected such a smiley, dreary and depressing topic to be. So thank you very much for a very lively way of looking at something which is definitely a very serious problem. So yes, sorry, I forgot to put on my video. So let's start by asking a few questions, or letting our fellows ask a few questions. So I would invite Aditya. Aditya, do you have anything to ask Doug?
Yeah, Anubha, thank you. Hi, Doug.
Aditya, your voice is very low. You'll have to speak louder or closer to the mic, please. Yeah.
Hi, Doug. That was really an inspiring presentation, actually. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, better.
Yeah. That was really an inspiring presentation, and a lot of initiatives that you have taken is really interesting, especially the waterfalling festival that you have come across as an initiative. That's really interesting. So the question that I had for you was, in a country like India, where millions of tons of plastics are produced every year, and plastic waste is seen as a problem of only a few minorities of people. And waste that's outside the house is mostly seen as the responsibility of the government to be taken care of. So with a lot of issues that's happening around us on a daily basis, there's an overload of issues for us to deal with, especially for this current generation. So how do we make plastics and its global impacts a topic for all so that it creates a need to focus on these issues more and more?
Okay, great question. So the Water Falling Festival, the reason we call it a festival is because it's a celebration to bring appreciation and awareness to the waters and their villages. So we didn't call it a cleanup. We didn't even talk about plastic. But in that community, there was very little education about this. There is zero waste management. There is zero recycling. They were never told about these options. And when we came in and aggregated the youth, we had youth ambassadors from the local high school who were all women, and they came in and we had younger children being educated. We did our Uncle Rooster play to 2,000 kids in the evening, and they've never even had a theater performance in their village before. And this just changed the discussion. And all of a sudden people want to be on the team and they want to be part of it. And when we did the Global Alert project with the river, all of the village chiefs, there were 4 or 5 of them, didn't used to really work together because they were sort of in competition. They didn't work that well with the government. And we got them into one room and we said, hey, we're going to each put a boom and a net up. And the guy at the end of the river said, you know, we can't be the only ones to put up the boom. You guys have to do it upstream because otherwise it's all going to come to our net and then I have to deal with all of it. Since they all said, oh, yeah, okay. So we'll put a net up in each of our little districts and we'll each take care of it. And because of that, they're now on the same team, and they never really drew the link between that river and the Tonle Sap Lake, which was only 4 kilometers away. And now that they've done this, the strings are tied and everyone is thinking that, wow, my work here 2 kilometers up is now helping the fishermen and the tourism down on Tonle Sap Lake. And sometimes it's just weaving this message in a different way that can get people on your side, I think.
Thank you. That was very well covered and quite inspiring. Shivi, you had a question as well.
Hello, Doug. It is really inspiring to share this webinar with you, and I'm fortunate to ask questions to you. So my question is, like, at one point of time we talk about biodegradable plastic, and we also talk about recycling of plastic, and we also talk about banning plastic, single-use plastic. So how to lead with the change, like how to bring that mind shift? Or we have to integrate all these things and then go forward with it. How to opt? Should we opt for one thing, or we should integrate these things and then come with a solution? So how to go forward with it?
That's a great question. Very complicated. This is why I said it's a very complicated issue. You need all of them to happen at the same time. Biomaterial can be made to be either biodegraded and composted, or it can be made to be recycled. The rigid material can be recycled. So if you're making it from a biosource, it's probably net better than a petroleum source. And there's new ways that you can make plastic from algae, so it's not necessarily a food crop. But the challenge is that the recyclers and the people sorting and collecting, and even the consumers, often have no idea that that product is made from petroleum, or it's meant to be composted, or it's meant to be recycled. And so that is a messy zone. And we really need to get a better branding and policy. In Taiwan, the collectors, they all know which products generally are made in the market, which are biomaterial. So they know how to sort that on their own now because they're familiar. And that will just be a step and a case for each community, but it really has to be branding and messaging. And we still need the recycling to happen. And we still need the avoidance of the stupid plastic, which we don't need for disposable and single-use things. So they all have to be firing at the same time.
Thanks, Shivi. And I think that brings us very nicely, segues into Sanika's question, who asked that there are 40,000 different varieties of plastic, especially single-use plastic. So how can we build efficient segregation and collection systems?
So that's a very good question. I would argue that most of the world's systems are antiquated and out of date by decades now. Unfortunately, many cities and municipalities have been forcing or trying to get us to sort things in 3 colored bins, which still get contamination and they still get low efficiencies. And so we're trying to promote wet and dry only. Globally, everyone can understand wet and dry. The wet stuff is the organics and the food waste, because if you put that into the omelet, I mentioned about the omelet of recycling. If you throw chicken fat and chicken grease and hamburgers and coffee into the recycling, no one will want to put their hands in there and get the good stuff out. But if it's all dry, paper, glass, metal, plastic, you have a 90% better chance of actually recovering that stuff in a waste recycling line. So a lot of the waste processing systems in our cities were just meant to get waste off the street, make it clean, hygienic, throw it in a big pit, and maybe sort a little bit of it along the way. That doesn't work anymore. A lot of the machinery gets clogged up because in the old days, plastic was not there to clog it up, and now it's there to clog it up, especially bags. And so we need to really think about how we're catching it right at the source, right in our house, wet and dry. And that could be done anywhere in the world.
So, but that also leads us to this next very interesting question by Shweta. She says that how long do you think we can sustain plastic recycling? Because even the highest quality plastic cannot be indefinitely recycled and it degrades in quality. And then in terms of carbon footprint, plastic seems to require less energy for production or transport. So what alternative do we have if we have to maintain between plastic pollution and our carbon footprint? So that's 2 questions really. One is how to maintain recycling and other plastic versus carbon.
Excellent question. We never mix carbon and climate change into the discussion, because when someone can't drink the water and they can't wash their clothes and they can't fish, that's because of plastic physical pollution in their space, not because of carbon or a footprint. But yes, recycling actually saves 75 to 85% energy use if you recycle it. But you are correct, you cannot just keep recycling it forever and ever. There's studies that have shown that unfortunately we're at the best optimum space for material use now, because if you go back to glass, if you go back to metal, go back to wood, the net negative impact because of all the resource needs and the transportation weight will be 4 to 5 times worse than with plastic. So we're at a difficult space because we can't really go anywhere else. There's no new magic material just yet that is edible and biodegradable, dissolve in water. Maybe that will come in a few years, but it's not here today. You need plastic for food. Food waste is a huge issue. And if you don't package that and maintain it, you will have even more food waste. So, okay, you can recycle as much as you can for that type. But at some point you're going to have to blend it, and maybe with a bit of virgin. But today we're not even doing that. So we have a huge amount of inventory to pick out and reuse in some way, even if it's for fuel or asphalt or concrete. Something has to be done. We can't just say get rid of it, because that's almost impossible, and we can't just say dump it or burn it, because that's worse.
So that there have been a lot of questions, and what you said also kind of leads to that around awareness, education, people's self-awareness, and also how does one then engage communities to ensure this kind of active participation? Because what you just outlined cannot be done at a policy level; it has to be done at an individual level. So how do
right.
communities, and are there? I'm sure there are difficulties in doing so. It may be mindset, it would be cultural, it could be all of that.
Right. This is why, again, it's complicated. It's not just about technology, it's about social change and social behavior. Incentive systems have to happen, but of course, governments are sometimes reluctant to do that, and companies don't want them to do that, either a tax or something that costs money to pay for the recovery, or a reward or something good on the other side for the consumers. So it's not just the consumers who are at fault. Unfortunately, a lot of the discussion in the last decades has been to the consumer, oh, you bought my product, it's your responsibility to throw it away and find a place to recycle it. It's not my responsibility, you bought it. And that needs to change. Now, obviously with social media, consumers can have more power to the brands and say, why are you packaging this way? Why don't you take my product back? Why aren't you using recycled content? And the brands have the most power here because they lead the consumers. They can do the messaging. They have the marketing. They have the R&D. And it is up to them to think long-term and be really engaged on this topic. Luckily, some of the big ones are, but a lot of the middle range and smaller ones don't feel the pain and the pressure yet. And that's a challenge. So it has to come from all points. That's why we do the education through art and other angles. Because like I said at the beginning, it's hard to get into schools and get this even discussed in the right way in a lot of the school systems. You know, there's not enough bandwidth for everyone to be doing that. So we have to touch at all levels.
Okay. So I'll take one last question. I know there are many more, but because this kind of leads to that, is recycling business a sustainable source of income for entrepreneurs? And how can the government support? And there have been a lot of questions on government and policy and who's going to put a stop to it. But so that's one part, you could take it as a bucket. And the second one is it a sustainable source for entrepreneurs? And how does it contribute, or how can the government contribute by it supporting the GDP? You know, the whole plastic waste.
Yeah, so the governments can play a major role. Companies want long-term planning and they want consistency. And if you regulate, it's proven that you have innovation. If you do not regulate, you have no innovation to meet those higher goals and higher standards. So a lot of these governments, including Hong Kong, said, I want innovation, but they're afraid, like anything, to regulate. Sorry, you can't have both. When they announced the Clean Air Act in the US in the 70s, there was an immediate spike in patents that were filed because people have to meet these new objectives. So the governments can put a price on using plastic, the EPR program. This is starting to come, extended producer responsibility. That means the companies shouldn't just be able to sell things without paying to play. They put a little price into the factor of the product. This is what Taiwan does very well. And that money goes into a proper use and proper spot for the government for recycling, pickup, recovery, and innovation. So the other thing they can do is put in their tenders that we want to buy and use recycled content. There has to be a demand. And that demand has to have economies of scale because then the price will come down. And right now, everyone says, oh, I shouldn't do that. And we can't use that because it's too expensive. That's because no one's ordering at volume. So someone has to take the lead. A company or government has to buy at volume, bring that price down. And entrepreneurs can definitely be part of this because the processing and the capture, a lot of big brands are looking for recycled content now of good quality, that's a transparent supply chain. And the entrepreneurs who can serve this market have a very good opportunity, but they need some of those levers with the companies and the governments to be able to help them get there.
Yes, thank you, Doug. And while there are many more questions, but I know that we have reached the end of our time. And so thank you. I would request a few questions that were left unanswered that you could possibly send them to us and we could see if we could answer them in any way. But to end for tonight or this evening, really, Let me start by by saying my thank you to Dog. It's very kind of you to have you here, and also to all the lovely audience who attended. So have a great weekend, everybody, and it was a pleasure having you here. And I hope to see many of you next Friday as well. Thank you, Dog.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
Thank you, Aditya, Himanshu, and the Anant team. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.